1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 1. Grab my Bible, I don't have it.
Alright, so the title of my sermon is Unlameness. I have not named this sermon yet. Not yet. But I do have a 3-point sermon for you guys, and I prepared it with a full heart. I stayed up all night yesterday and just praying to God that He would anoint me. Okay, so
Byron, bring up the mic. We can't hear.
Okay. The context of Corinthians consists of a 2-part history. Writing letters according to Leon Morris in the book of 1 Corinthians. Corinth was located in Ostamus, which connects mainland Greece and the Peloponnesian. Corinth was also an important city to Greece. Its geological location was in the center of trade. This meant that Corinth had major trading centers, resulting in many other countries networking with Corinth. Corinth was also a place where people didn't struggle with sexual immorality, but they lived in it. For someone to call you a Corinth would mean that he would basically tell you that you're promiscuous. It was basically a synonym for promiscuous if someone called you a Corinth. Now let's go to our text. Verse 1. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud around the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered over the desert. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Do not be idolaters as some of them were, as it is written. The people sat down to eat, and they drank and got up, indulged in pagan rivalry. You should not commit sexual immorality as some of them did. And one day, 23,000 of them died. We should not test the Lord as some of them did, and were killed by snakes. Do not grumble as some of them did, and were killed by a destroying angel. These things happened to them as examples, and were written down as warnings for us, in whom the fulfillment of the ages has come. So if you think that you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. So, the introduction. Alright? So, when I was in boxing, I used to have 2 great friends. One was named David, or Renee Lara, and the other one was named Alexander Flores. Well, we call him Alex. He was a 6-foot heavyweight fighter who came from a background of being bullied because he was an overweight teenager who didn't know how to protect himself. Renee Lara came from a background spending most of his time in the streets with the wrong kind of crowd, leading him to a violent past. They came from 2 different backgrounds and they were the people that insisted to help me while I was in the boxing ring. Inside the boxing gym, Alex would spend his time consistently hitting the bag for 10 rounds, running 5 miles, jumping rope, and many other exercises. That gave him the record of being an undefeated amateur fighter for 10 fights, as well as an undefeated professional fighter for 10 fights. In summary, now, Renee, on the other hand, spent some of his time training, not as high intensity, as well as sometimes not training at all. In summary, most of his training consisted of at first looking like he was really training hard in the beginning, but it only ended up being him hitting the bag for 3 rounds then sat for the next 3 hours talking about how good he would be as a professional fighter. As a result, he had 17 fights with 10 losses, and 4 of them coming by the way of knockout. And also his professional record only consisted of 1 fight, which resulted in 1 draw. We can relate to these 2 fighters, Alex and David, in the same way as the relationship with the people in the Old Testament. Paul states to the Corinthians in verse 1 that their forefathers, though in the same situations that the Corinthians are going through, which they had followed and performing tasks were given to them by Moses, which consisted of eating spiritual food as well as spiritual drink, and the spiritual rock, which was Jesus Christ. This was in the context of these people who were of God, who were Hebrews, and they performed these tasks superficially. That means that they, of course, acted as if they were Christians or as if they were the people of God. But as a result, it was just superficial. If you look up superficial, the definition of superficial would be just surface, very shallow. That is what a superficial Christian is. In verse 5, Paul explains that even though their forefathers performed many works, God was not pleased with them. He continues to explain why God was not happy with them, and the reason he was not pleased with them was because they were scattered, meaning that they had many divisions between them, or in other words, cliques. The evidence is supported by 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 11 to 12. If you guys can turn there, it says, okay, my brothers, some from Cole's household have informed me that there are quarrels among you. What I mean is this: one of you says, I follow Paul; another, I follow Apollos; another, I follow Cephas; another, I follow Christ. This is an example of cliques, many of which we have here as well. I'm not going to point any out because this is not the topic of my sermon. This is my topic. Superficialness. We don't want to be superficial before God because He can see through us. My second point. What happens to the people who are superficial? Paul continues by saying that these things happened to the forefathers and were not taken note of because they can serve as an example of what can happen to us if we are not truly following God. When we say we're following God, we don't only just say it superficially. That's not what Christians are supposed to do. No, we're supposed to walk it out as well. If we don't, we will be shown by many trials and tribulations. For example, I remember when I was about a young Christian, 18, about 1 year old. We didn't have any food. We didn't have anything. We were about to get kicked out of our house. We didn't have any money to pay rent. If I was a superficial Christian, I know I wasn't because I'm here now, I would have given up on God. I would have said, you know what, forget this. I don't know what to do. I can't do anything. There's nothing I can do. I don't have nothing. We have no food. We have no water. We did have water because we have the sink. But you guys get the point. The very same day, my mom actually found some donations from someone else, which was food. And now I know that was God. There was also a different time when we had no money. My mom's car, my mom's truck was taken away, was vetoed because she was driving without a license. We had no money to pay off the car, to get the car from the pound, from impound. But however, my check came from my professional boxing fight that same day, and I was able to pay it off that same day. That was as a result of me going to God and saying, God, if you're testing me, please don't test me anymore. I don't want to be tested anymore. I am your child. I am your child. But I just don't want it anymore. The next moment, of course, the check came. So this is when the superficial are separated from the real Christians. Trials and tribulations. Paul is explaining this on the verses 1 through 10. He's saying there's a big difference between the superficial Christians as well as the legitimate Christians. Let's see. As a result, the forefathers disobedient God's hearts. God casted out plagues on them. God casted out plagues on me not because He wanted to show me that I was not a Christian, but because He wanted to prove to me that I am a Christian. Because through that testimony, I was able to prove to myself that I truly was a Christian. In other words, cause and effect. If you ignite God's wrath, you're going to get it, which is explained in verse 8 through 10. Now, when we have a superficial life, no one has to see it. No physical person has to really see it. But God knows all. So, sooner or later, if you're a superficial Christian, you say that you're a legit Christian, you go to church Monday, Sunday, Wednesday, it doesn't matter. Sooner or later, God's going to cast out something to show you if you're a real Christian or not. And if you are, most likely you're going to prevail. This is stated in my next one. Those who are committed will persevere and will be given a way out, which is verses 11 through 13. Here it is stated. 11. My brothers, some from Gonzales, chapter 10. These things have happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come. If you think that you are standing firm, be careful that you do not fall. Now the reason Paul is stating this, if you think that you are standing firm, be careful. The reason he was stating this is because there were superficial Christians and there were quarrels. The people that stated in chapter 1, verses 11 to 13, that said, we follow Christ, those guys were not really following Christ. They were just being self-righteous. Because later on in that chapter, Paul said, Christ is not divided. If they were really following Christ, then they wouldn't be divided. So those people were just self-righteous people. So the people talked back to him and said, we follow Christ. We're obeying the law. It's okay. We're good. We're obeying the law. But then he says, in reply, he says, so if you think you are standing firm, he's saying, he's making sure, if you really think you're standing firm, be careful. He's saying be careful because those people that said they were following Christ weren't really following Christ. He was making sure with them, be careful that you do not fall. Of course, in the church of Corinth, I'm sure there were a few Christians that were saved and were really following Christ. But he was just making sure, they're saying, be careful. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man. What is common to man? What that means is basically that everything that you're tempted with, everything that I'm tempted with, every single little thing that you're tempted with, someone has gone through the same thing and prevailed somehow, some way. But with Christ, He is not. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. That means whatever God has in store for you, whatever kinds of challenges He has for you, He will not go above what you can bear. And if He can't, and if you are tempted beyond what you can bear, like for example, I couldn't pay for what I could have, God will provide a way out. But When you are tempted, he will provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. Let's see. Those who are committed will persevere to the end. Okay. In verse 11, Paul relates that the things the forefathers went through will be looked at as a warning to Corinthians, as well as an example of what will happen to them if they continue lustful and shameful desires. Paul also states, for the ages to come, meaning that this still is applicable to us. Paul continues with a challenge to the Corinthians, stating, if you think you're standing firm, be careful not to fall away. The reason Paul is saying this is because of the last part of chapter 1, verse 12, where Paul is saying that there are divisions in the church. The people who he stated, we follow Christ, well, we're not really following Christ. Again, this is what I said. They were just self-righteous people. Paul states later on in the chapter that Christ is not divided. And finally, Paul states in verse 13, everything in Corinthians were not going through. Okay. And finally, Paul states in verse 13 that everything in Corinthians we're not going through. We're not going though. Okay, that was the typo. I'm like, what's going on? We're not going through. All these people, what they were going through was sexual immorality, idolatry, division. So, someone else has gone through the same thing, as well as God not letting them get tempted more than what you can bear. But if you are tempted, he will provide a way out. In conclusion, within our modern day church, there are many people who are Christian by what they say, but not by what they do. And then there are Christians that are not only Christians by what they say, not by what they say, but by the way they live, the way they breathe, the way they walk, as well as the way they love. Don't get me wrong. Every Christian has their struggles. We all have our struggles. I have my struggles. Pastor T has his struggles.
Impossible. Just kidding.
Byron is my struggle.
Boy. Continue.
Pastor T. Okay. Don't get me wrong. Okay. It just
It's all good. Let's go.
This is let's see. Be true, but truly ask yourself: are you really doing this for God, or are you doing this for self-glorification, money, power, friends? If so, repent. Then turn to God, as well as it is stated in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12. If you think you're not standing firm, be careful that you will not fall. In the statement, Paul is challenging the congregation in Corinth to see that they are truly with God. And again, I like to state that we shouldn't dread the people who just come here for a superficial reason. Instead, we should have an open heart to them as well as a broken heart. Our mind should be in line with the statement of American evangelist Billy Graham. Tears shed for self are tears of weakness, but tears shed for others are a sign of strength. I'm Byron Gonzales. Thank you.
Woo! Byronius Prime.